What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today I'm taking a look at Big Stones, which is probably the most played deck currently in Marvel Snap, and I don't typically just like to cover and play the best deck. As you guys know, I'm typically playing stuff that's a little bit more wacky, but I really wanted to make a video on this deck because it really impressed me, not just in how powerful the deck was, but in how much my decisions felt like they mattered when I played this deck. Every game that I lose with it, I feel like I could have played better. I made mistakes that caused that loss. And similarly, when I win, it feels like I'm actively making really good choices in games that I could have lost had I played them differently. As well, the snapping and the retreating feels really good, and we're going to look at both ends of the spectrum in this video. We're going to start off with some of my first games with the deck, and we're going to look at some losses. Now, there's some interesting things going on here. I snap on turn 3. There's some reasons why this is potentially wrong. Now, why this is good is I'm playing Time Stone on turn 3. That's going to play one of the deck's many 5-cost cards, and then set up to just drop some big stuff. That's why I call the deck Big Stones. You drop some stones, then you drop some big stuff. However, I think that there's a few things that are telegraphing my play here in an awkward way. First off, I'm snapping to Rickety Bridge, which I think just really telegraphs that I have Professor X, and my opponent has to make a really bold play here, which is why I didn't think that they would do it. They're playing a Loki deck, by the way. If they play Loki into Rickety Bridge here, it was a coin flip, I do have priority, so Werewolf isn't going to move. I'm going to flip first and lock down Rickety Bridge with Professor X. But we're going to see that my opponent plays Loki into that location. A really bold play by them. I thought they were going to do it, but I didn't know if they would have the stones to do it, ironically. And Loki is pretty good against this deck, specifically because they don't get the stones, they just get the big stuff at a little bit of a cheaper rate here, so that is a little bit unfortunate. And then they just continue to have my number. They pull Shang-Chi off Doc Ock into the Soul Stone lane, so Shang-Chi can't even kill Doc Ock, which is just absolutely crazy. I also play Doc Ock this turn, but I play Doc Ock into their werewolf location, so they could still move the werewolf if they want to, and then I'm also just losing in the location because they pull Magneto. So their Doc Ock was significantly better than mine. Part of the reason for that is they don't have stones in their deck, so we're going to get out of there on that one. And yeah, this was, like I said, one of my first games with the deck, but they definitely got me. And then the final game of this conquest, my opponent just beats me in every single location. They Shang-Chi my Thanos, they Elektra one of my stones, they move over Werewolf a bunch of times to protect from the Doc Ock again, and I'm still losing this location to just their other cards here. It's 11-1. So it's really not looking great for me, and Snowguard Bear gives a little bit more power to everything. So there's maybe some options. I've got a huge Iron Lad, but I just don't really see a way around it. The only play I could do here is I could play Mind Stone, hope that they move Werewolf out of Wakandan Embassy, and then I play my 10 power Iron Lad somewhere else. Probably, I mean, it doesn't matter. The other locations are basically the same. I just have to hope to get a little bit lucky, and I don't. But I'm already playing for max cubes here. There's no retreating at this point. My opponent does a wonderful job not moving that werewolf by playing all 3 of their cards to the center location, so they're not triggering their on reveals and causing werewolf to move. So they still beat me in the embassy, and Iron Lad actually isn't even enough to defeat my opponent's 7 power Silk, which gets locked down there thanks to Professor X. So a pretty embarrassing loss, and we're going to look at one more loss. It's funny, we're going to look at losses in Proving Grounds, and then I've won a few Infinity tickets with this deck already. So then we're going to take a look at some wins in Gold Conquest. Just a few highlights. I think I'm going to look at 3 different like individual game highlights here. But this one is just a really embarrassing one. I've got Subterranea. I'm drawing a bunch of rocks, not doing super hot for myself, and this is just awkward. So I have priority after Devil Dinosaur pumps itself up. I did not realize that. I thought my opponent had priority here, so I decide that my best use of turn 5 is to try to catch my opponent's werewolf, and I'm thinking it could hop back into the Great Web, but then it flips over first, and it sees a 9-power werewolf there, and I don't get to do anything. My opponent uses Snowguard Bear to move things over, and yeah, it's just awkward. So, or to give me more rocks is what I meant to say. I can play Blob here into the Great Web Mark II, which does battle for that location, and I'm up a significant amount in Great Web Prime, but they can just move Werewolf over, and then it's 13 additional power, so I'm not winning the Great Web by that much, and Devil Dinosaur is going to shrink here as well. So, yeah, it's just awkward. I get absolutely destroyed here for 8 cubes, as my opponent not only uses Wave to move over Werewolf and win the Great Web, but also Cosmo to stop my Blob. So yeah, pretty embarrassing one. Let's take a look at some wins here. We are joining this battle late into a Gold Conquest, and I've got Space Stone, Power Stone, Psylocke, and Nico, which can turn something into a demon. I just like playing my stones out early that aren't Energy Stone, because you're trying to draw Energy Stone. That is the main idea here. And I've got a Koye. I actually already have Psylocke. I don't even know what I'm saying. I've got Psylocke, I've got a Koye. I could even make an additional copy of a card with Nico if I decide to play that this turn. But I do think a Koye on curve is probably the best way to go about this, and I can probably snap here, even though, okay, I am actually going to go for Nico. My opponent snaps back. Okay, I do go for a Koye. I think both of those could be fine plays. The trick with Nico is, like, next turn I'm just going to play Psylocke anyways, so I don't really need to do anything too crazy with Nico. My opponent plays a Time Stone on turn 2, so they will have 5 energy on turn 3. And then, so they could theoretically play like Vision on turn 3 or Professor into turn 4 Iron Lad, and then turn 5 another big 5, and turn 6 another big card. So my opponent has a lot of really powerful options here. I'm going to play Nico to move the Psylocke into the raft after triggering it twice in Camartage. I am going to need to draw some big stuff, but I feel like I'm battling on an interesting level here, and my opponent uses Professor X to lock down the Danger Room. A lot of Professor X in this video. We're going to see a lot of that, as there are a few mirror matches coming up. And I can understand not being super interested in playing mirror matches in general. Just like in any game, sometimes people find that boring. I think that this is a really skill-testing mirror, and it's actually a lot of fun. Professor, Alioth, those kind of things can get annoying, believe me, I'm aware. But yeah, there's just some other cool stuff going on. So I fill the raft and then turn it into Hellfire Club. That'll stop my opponent from dropping some stones down in there. And then on turn 5, I'm just going to drop that Giganto, and I drop Mind Stone. The reason that I play Giganto gives it away a little bit. My opponent could now Shang-Chi me. But I also know that my opponent has Alioth, so I want to get priority to play around that. There's a lot of things to consider here. I feel like Camartage is, I mean, that's probably not what my opponent is going to try to battle for, because I'm bunked right now in Hellfire Club, and this was a choice. This was definitely a big gamble here to say I'm going to fill Hellfire Club, and I've already lost in the Danger Room, but it felt like the right play to me. and we'll see that it will ultimately pay off here. I was in an awkward position after my opponent got that cheeky turn 3 Professor X, and sometimes when your back is up against the wall, you don't really have the ability to say, okay, I'm gonna like do my deck's ideal game plan. I'm just gonna try to do something. And the something that I find here I think is particularly cheeky. I'm winning Kamar Taj. My opponent can Shang-Chi me in Kamar Taj. That will put them, I mean, I still win it here, 8-7. So I can play Time Stone, double trigger it, and grow my Devil Dinosaur with that Time Stone. And this winds up being a super clutch play that my opponent was probably not expecting. Not that they were going to retreat either, but we grow Devil Dinosaur to be big enough that we beat their Thanos and take the win. Thought that was a really sweet one. Let's take a look at one more Gold Conquest game. Just jumping around across like a few different tickets that I spent here. This one, I get Castle Blackstone to start it off. Didn't make a video or too much content really surrounding Castle Blackstone, and I've already snapped. I guess we could go back to see exactly when I snapped. It was just turn 1 when I saw Castle Blackstone and the fact that I had the Time Stone. I was feeling my chances on this one because with Time Stone plus Blackstone, we'll be able to play a turn 4 Thanos. And just opens up a lot of really interesting lines. Soulstone really strong in the early game because my opponent is very much not incentivized to play there. Meant to bring that up on the first game that we looked at as well, but one of the reasons that I think also kind of convinced my opponent to go for that Loki strat was just to avoid Soulstone. So there is some interesting things to consider there with Soulstone plus Professor X. My opponent plays a Morbius to kick things off here, and we've got 5 energy rather on turn 5. That's right, I did go for the turn 2 Time Stone, realizing that I was going to have 5 energy here, with the main consideration being that I'm going to draw a bunch of cards. I'm going to draw 2 not good cards off Mind Stone, but then I'm going to draw a card off Time Stone and a card for turn. And with that, I should probably find a cool 5-cost card to play. So that was the idea here. Now that card is Dr. Ock, or potentially Iron Lad plus Nico on Destroy mode. It's kind of weird, but I want to save my Reality Stone, and I want to keep winning in Castle Blackstone because I just used up my Time Stone, so I felt like a strong play here was to continue to win with power in Castle Blackstone. And you can see, had I not made that play, I would have tied in Castle Blackstone this turn and then only had 4 energy, which I could have used to play the Iron Lad then, but it really works out for me as I get an additional copy of Devil Dinosaur. Now, Devil Dinosaur is not going to go great in Shuri's Lab, and honestly, anything that I do is not going to go super great this turn. I'm going to destroy it and draw 2 cards with Nico. So I felt like the best option that I had was just to drag out a bunch of my opponent's cards into Limbo, and then next turn play a card into Shuri's Lab and potentially end the game with Reality Stone to really catch my opponent off guard. We take their Swarm, their Apocalypse, and their Hell Cow, and that means my opponent's out of cards in their hand to discard. They are completely hell-bent and aren't going to be able to discard from Hell Cow there. And from here, I can just play Vision plus Reality Stone into Limbo, and that'll end the game. And, oh, that's right, this is only turn 5. My math is getting thrown off because of Castle Blackstone. I'm like, why didn't I go for that? The reason is I don't want to let my opponent know that I'm going to turn off Limbo. I think that's like a pretty huge advantage that I have, that I know how many turns are left in this game and my opponent does not. So that's the plan here. I can move over the Nico first and then move over Vision, and then I'm probably also winning in that location. And then from there, I'll just play Blob into Shuri's Lab, and that'll be a ridiculous amount of power. They are going to wind up retreating. They saw the Reality Stone coming, but I still thought that this was a pretty sweet game here with Castle Blackstone, and I think my plan is to watch at least one more game. I don't remember how much of this conquest I saved, but we're at least watching one more game. Oh, and that's right, we get a Nexus. This is, I'll actually just skip through this. I don't think that it's like super important. You get the idea. It's the Nexus. This deck plays a bunch of really big cards, and I do even decide to just play Dr. Octopus into the Nexus again this game, with the idea being that it like shuts off their synergy, it shuts off their ability to control what they're putting into the location. I was also able to trigger the Abbey, which was pretty sweet. So this game's going to be pretty straightforward from here. I'm just going to Doc Ock, and then I'm going to Devil Dino, and then I think my opponent's going to retreat. It's pretty straightforward from there. So we will move on to one final conquest battle that I wanted to showcase, and I am now down to just one cube. This is where we've put ourselves. My opponent, though, with 3 cubes. Not that many cubes left. This was battle 7 of a conquest, so we've been going back and forth here a little bit. And in this game, I do run out Reality Stone on turn 1. The key difference being that I want to draw cards still. This isn't a game where I can afford to keep Reality Stone. I do debate Okoye putting Okoye into Bar Sinister. This Bar Sinister, there's a lot of tempting things here with this deck, but I'm going to hang off for just another second and throw Okoye into the Wakandan Embassy. The other reason that Okoye into Bar Sinister seems tempting is because I don't want to put Okoye into Necrotia, because it won't give me any additional power there. Still have priority going into turn 3, and unfortunately have not found a Time Stone or a Psylocke. My opponent has, but they play it turn 2, which I don't think really sets up for anything particularly crazy. I'm eyeing up some other plays here. Iron Lad into Space Stone. My opponent goes for Gladiator. Talk about crazy plays. They're going to get 4 copies of Gladiator and destroy my deck with it, which shrinks my Blob. This is kind of a cheeky way to make sure Blob isn't a super important threat. Gladiator's going to be weak enough still that it dodges Shang-Chi, unfortunately, and my opponent just Gladiators me 4 times. Runner, 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 runner. And yeah, awkward. It's also a reasonably powerful card, so I'm going to have to commit serious resources. It's not like I can just play Iron Lad in that location or Professor X or anything, but what I can play is Vision. So that was a really good draw off the top there. Now I can play Vision in Bar Sinister on turn 4, and I've actually won this game. I'm not sure if you see it quite yet, but my opponent's going to Professor one of the locations. They'll Professor the Wakandan Embassy and get a win there. But next turn, I'll be able to move 2 of my Visions over and Professor X into Necrotia, and that's all she wrote. My opponent cannot win this game now. And yeah, so definitely a lot of silly Professor X stuff going on in this one, but that's what the mirrors are made of. There's Professor X on both sides here. My opponent plays an Iron Lad. If they hit Blob, whew, they could have actually got me there, but luckily I dodged the Blob, and now I can drop my own Blob into Bar Sinister or Thanos, whatever. I wasn't sure how many cards I had left in my deck, how big my Blob actually was. I still have Magneto though, so I probably would have been fine, but my opponent retreats, and we move on to the final game of this conquest, high stakes round number 8. And we wish my opponent good luck there with a fist bump. We've got Cloning Vats, Space Stone, Professor X, and Blob. With only 1 stone in my opening hand, I'm going to drop it into the vat so that way I can draw more cards. My opponent hits me with a Space Stone, or a Soul Stone rather, which is going to shrink some of my power. Then Central Park throws a squirrel into each location. This is not looking great. My opponent's going to be able to Soul Stone 2 different locations. I've got a bunch of cheap cards. Like, I'm just filling up all of this space in a way that I don't think is going to be great for me. They use turn 2 to develop Jeff and get a second copy of that. Reality Stone changes Central Park into the hub, which gives me Legion plus Iron Lad off the top. And then Space Stone gives me Nico as we move into turn 3. I don't get to draw this turn, but I do have Psylocke. So I can play Psylocke into one of these locations and set up for a nice play next turn into Cloning Vats. I think about moving over the squirrel, but then I realize X-Mansion will fill me, so I gotta stop playing cards here. It's just Psylocke. My opponent plays Soulstone into X-Mansion and Jeff into Cloning Vats, grabbing another copy of Jeff. X-Mansion is going to give me Spider-Man and my opponent Wave, which makes this an absolutely epic finals because we're gonna be blobbing now. We both got basically the same roll from X-Mansion. We both got a 5-power card, so that's not gonna like ruin the game. We're still on the same page here. And I think about Nicoing Blob. Nico before Blob will give Blob 2 additional power, which will transfer over to the copy of it that I get out of Cloning Vats. I don't think that's necessary. I think it will actually be important to give myself an additional space in Cloning Vats in case I need more power to beat my opponent's Blob. So that's what I go for. Just Blob on this turn. Like I said, we're running out of space on this one. My opponent blobs for 48 up to 53. I blob for 53 up to 52. 1 less power on everything because of the Soulstone. So this is actually a pretty good spot. My blob is 5 more power than my opponent's. I have to play around Shang-Chi here in the Cloning Vats, and Professor also just locks my opponent out of that location, so it'll turn the final turn of the game into a 50-50 coin flip here. My opponent gladiators me, my deck is empty from the blob, and then they play one last Jeff. So my opponent does have priority going into this final turn. I do have to worry about Alioth. I'm expecting that they're just going to be playing the blob in one of these locations, but the fact that it could be Alioth means that I don't want to just rely on Shang-Chi, and I guess right. I dodge the blob. My opponent gives me the fist bump there. It was a really, really sweet match, and that's like the important thing. I think that's the most important part of this video. All of my matches have been really sweet with this deck, and that is, sorry, I wanted to pause it here on this screen. Beautiful. All of my matches have been really fun. And I'm just showing like a small selection of some interesting Conquest games. I've only really played this deck in Conquest, but I think it's a great deck for the Conquest format. There are a lot of different ways to customize the deck as well with Alioth. Shoot. Well, whatever. I'm farming engagement by saying Alioth. We'll go with that. I just copied KM Best's list and ran with it, so that is how I explain my choices here. I don't actually know that I'm in love with Nico, but it's a pretty dang good card, to be totally honest. So I think I like this list. There might be some changes that you have to make to it, depending on what we see in the OTA tomorrow. But there are just so many different cards that you can play and so many different fun lines that the deck can come up with that just makes it feel like really dynamic and really fun Marvel Snap. So that's my sell on Big Stones here. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this little look at the deck. But for today, that's going to be it for me. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven, and I will say, there's Twitch drops that are live starting today. I'm going to be streaming Fairy Tale Fables, but there's definitely going to be some Marvel Snap as a part of those streams. If not this week, at the very least going forward. But I might play some Marvel Snap just to mix it up a little bit. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.